Neo-Nazis, man. Um, there's Venn diagram with other forms of scumbaggery.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I don't know if you're tracking Richard Hanania. Like, so
Yeah, yeah,
I was
yeah.
curious your thoughts about this guy because, like, in geopolitics world, there have been some critical scholar type people who have been trying to kind of like low key reincorporate him, and like some of them have like become paid subscribers to my newsletter just to send me messages to be like, hey, give this guy a chance. And like I'm like, wait, isn't he like race science guy? Isn't he like a fucking right wing, like what am I going to give him a chance about? Like, what does that mean?
Well, okay, so I think there's a couple of things going on here. One is, well, okay, look, when I got canceled last year, guess who sent me a big fucking letter saying I did nothing wrong and I should join
That's
the,
right.
yeah,
That I knew
it
there was
was
a
it
reason I
was
wanted to
Hanania.
ask you about him, and that was what it was.
Yeah. And lo and behold, and actually this kind of put some of the pieces together because there were a bunch of like obviously like social justice-y academics who were going hard after me, which
Mm.
fair enough. But then there was this moment where the far right and the sort of reactionary centrists started going after me, like Noah Smith and Matt Iglesias and those guys, and then
Oh,
Hanania. And
really?
I have to I should look back through those exchanges if I can still pull them up because it would be interesting to get the timing down of what came first. Was it the far right guys or was it the reaction? You said it was my cat. Yes, hello, cat. Um, Cat's name is Bernie for whatever that's.
Beautiful.
Yes, hello, Bernie. But now it turns out because I was reading that semaphore story, they were all in the fucking same group chats together. Yeah, Bernie, I gotta be sorry. They were all in the fucking same group chats together last year, like coordinating their political messaging. And so, I think Hanania in particular is, and I wrote that thread on Blue Sky. I think I'm going to write a column about this actually. Maybe not about Hanania specifically, but the whole like woke right,
Mhm.
anti woke right guys on the right now. I think what they're trying to do is they realize that Trumpism is losing popularity fast. And that for Hanania in particular, what he wants most of all is liberal respectability. I mean, like respectability policies, the whole idea of the responsible conservative is something liberals grant to who they perceive to be the loyal opposition. And that matters to Hanania. Kind of goes
Mm.
back to, all the far right guys would say that Buckley substantively agreed with them, but he didn't want to piss off his, liberal Jew buddies in New York because then he wouldn't get invited to the right cocktail parties. And I think that's actually right. I think that that's a point I tried to make in my book. Not the anti-Semitic part, but the fact that that's what Buckley, uh, um,
Motivated
and
him, yeah.
yeah. And I think that's Hanania, and I think that because he's also a clear believer in not just like the race IQ stuff, but he's just an elitist. He really believes in the kind of philosopher king, the smartest guys in the room. In that sense, he's not that different from a lot of neo-libs, and
Yeah.
like that's the basis of this. And so I think that he is deliberately trying to cultivate support in that set. And again, you already see this with guys like Matt Iglesias. And I'm curious in IR world who is trying to sort of incorporate him into this because my instinct is, I mean, are they trying to suggest that like he's like a critic of American empire who could be potentially useful?
Yeah, like it's not any mainstream people. It's like sort of fringy scholars who reject liberal internationalism, but who don't, like, in my sense is they don't have like a coherent analysis of their own necessarily, or like a patched together worldview fully, but they do appreciate kind of heterodox opinions. And they're like, this guy says some
Yeah.
wild stuff, and wild is implicitly good, is kind of the so
I mean, it's kind of the same shit, and I criticized him for it, but the tweet was critical and he took it critically, but I also get it. But like this is why Sam Moyen teaches that class with Ross Douthat at Yale because they both fucking hate elite liberalism and they should both
yeah.
fucking hate elite liberalism. But like that's it's having that kind of like interlocutor from the right to attack the common target. And personally, I'm just not about that. Like I have no interest in working in coalition with dudes like that or being part of that conversation. And I had a chance a year ago to like openly embrace that shit, and I very deliberately chose not to.
Yeah,
Um, I
that
just
was good of
I
you.
don't see. Well, the thing is that I don't see what. I don't see what can be productive about it. I mean, I think a lot about that Anton Yeager quote that has been circulating about, like, how the left can't get over the fact that the far right, that neoliberalism might be dead, but it wasn't the left that killed it, which I think is insightful, although I don't think neoliberalism is dead.
Yeah, right. There is something
But
to that statement, though. Like,
yeah, but I mean, I also don't think I don't think that you have to hand it to them. Like, I don't think that that's a productive. I don't think that's a particularly productive form of politics. And just at a very basic level, I mean, my politics and my sort of political radicalization ultimately stems from, the protests and the uprisings in the first Trump administration, culminating with George Floyd. And like, I have
hmm,
no interest in being in coalition or working with somebody or being part of the same broader sort of social space as people who are like, yeah, there's cops who just fucking killed all those people.
yeah,
Not that Hanania necessarily said that, but that's what these guys all think.
yeah. Well, and he's in that fucking, group chat from hell. Like he's part of grooming that dystopian tech elite monarchy class in like the convergence that they have with the ethno nationalists is at best unsettling. I mean, I should say like my I think one of the things that, well, I can save the flattery for when we start the episode maybe. But like I see similarities between us, including like how we might have evolved. But like I got my PhD at Catholic University. Like
Oh shit.
it's
Oh
a
yeah. Okay.
fucking seriously right hardcore paleocon school.
When did you get your PhD?
I was there from '09 to 2014. I graduated in 2014.
And like you said, it was always a conservative institution. I had a roommate who went to Catholic. Like, yeah, no, they were already right wing, and they went super fucking hardcore to the right after 2017.
Yeah, no, so like I'm very lucky in a way about my timing because it was clear. I mean, they were teaching like hardcore, normative originalist constitution shit, and like they were they gave it was a political science program that had none of the science in it really. It was like political theory, which for me ended up being a great thing, but is very abnormal for IR, for poli
Yeah.
sci, and I lucked into that. I had no idea what these guys were about. I just needed a PhD program that I could do part time while I worked in the Pentagon, and I was like, oh, like I'm totally fucking naive. And then I got there, and I'm like, oh, this is a bunch of right wingers, and I made my peace with that in part because I grew up in like Rush Limbaugh household, so like it
Mhm.
wasn't like foreign to me necessarily, but also like we built up a lot of sociality. Like we would play poker together. Like it wasn't just like I would go to classes. Like we hung out together, and the thing that was very seductive. Matt Sitman talks about this sometimes is like that whole right wing world, even if you were to like bracket off heritage and AEI, they like they do meetings in like rooms with mahogany shelves and
Yep.
leather bound books and brandy snifters, and like it feels like you're in some fantasy club in some way. You're talking about ideas, but you're talking about ideas that you think have like real weight, and that you have like
Mhm.
a superior morality that you're bringing to these questions, and like that plus the insider vibes, and it's who doesn't like to be an elite, like they make you feel that way. There's a feeling that comes with this whole world that I found very seductive, and it was very in keeping with the sort of liberal primacist neocon world of like defense policy stuff. It's just that those guys had a kind of nominal, egalitarianism about that, like, like a Democrat shit. And
Yeah.
so, like, rainbow bombs, basically. And so,
Yeah.
like, it wasn't a hard leap to go from that Catholic university conservatism to Democratic Party neoconservatism, give or take. Like, that was actually, in hindsight, uncomfortably nested well together. But there, and the Catholic guys, the one thing that won me over once I realized they were right wing was that they did hate George W. Bush and they did hate the Iraq War.
Yep. Yep.
And
Yep.
I
Yep.
was
Yep.
like, these guys can't be all bad. That was my reasoning at the time. but yeah, like it got worse and worse. The Brett Kavanaugh stuff, like he was coming by all the time and he was a fucking scumbag. And then that guy, why am I blanking on his name, from the 90s, the Contract for America? Um,
Oh, Gingrich.
yeah, he was fucking hanging out all the time and he's also a scumbag, you know? And like it's just like the people who were cahooting in this space was like in increasingly the worst of the worst. And I was just lucky that like by the time I started realizing that, I was already out, you know.
Hmm.
But
I mean, it's one of those things where, like, and I do try to I do try to go out of my way to maintain friendships and maintain some level of relationship with, conservatives. I also teach classes on the history of the American right, the history of fascism, and a class on conspiracy theories and American culture
awesome.
and politics with my friend and colleague Andrew Ferguson. We actually have a feature. We always make sure to show at least one 70s conspiracy thriller to our kids every semester. So I think this semester we did the Parallax View. Last year we did Winter Kills, the
I
Jeff Bridges.
haven't seen
Oh no,
that.
you got to see it. It's
Huh.
fucking crazy. It was a movie that was in part fine. Like one of the producers like got killed in a drug deal gone wrong like halfway through production.
Wow.
It has an amazing cast like Jeff Bridges, Walter Houston. It's about the Kennedy assassination, like a fictionalized version. Because it was coming out right at the same time as the House Select Committee on Assassinations, and it was like a passion project for all of these people. So a lot of actors showed up in it for like cameos and didn't even accept pay. I think Tony Perkins is in it. And it's a lunatic movie. It's absolutely crazy.
When did
Can
it
I
come
spoil?
out?
79.
Okay.
Can I spoil the ending for you?
Yes.
Yeah. So the big twist at the end is that it was actually Joe Kennedy who was responsible for the assassination of JFK.
Oh wow. Didn't see that in the JFK files. Um
So
interesting.
yeah, so we always there's a whole movies are such a rich text for understanding American politics, culture, and history.
Yeah, yeah. Um so we're here to talk about part 4, block 4 of season 1 of Andor. Before we get to Andor, I just had a quick question about back to your like far right and mainstream conservatism book. Is like you said the Cold War really helped keep it all together,
Mhm.
the conservative movement. That was a kind of Cold War was like a keystone in this synthesis or integralism or whatever. And so your fusing or fusionism, I guess would be the
Yeah.
word, but a bunch of disparate interest groups finding common cause under the conservative movement umbrella, but like logically, these things don't necessarily all go together. Do you think that there is like a new fusionism happening with the MAGA right, with these various like I don't know tech overlords and the natcons and like all of that?
I think they're trying. I wrote something about this in Boston Review at the beginning of the year. I do think that there is this deliberate attempt by the tech right, by the America First faction. I think Quinn Slobodian also said that his analysis of the three factions in the White House are the tech right, the America Firsters, and the accelerationists, like the Curtis Yarvin types. I think they're basically just the same as the tech right. But I do think that they are all kind of operating together in an attempt to create this new fusionism under kind of the banner of anti-wokeness. That seems to be, let's put it this way, the woke language is doing for this modern attempt to create this sort of new fusionist coalition the same kind of work that communism did back in the 1950s and 1960s. Like when Joe McCarthy is talking about like the dangers of communism in America, he's not talking about the Soviet Union. He's not talking about international communism. He's not even necessarily talking about the need to establish a worldwide garrison state. For McCarthy specifically, communism is whatever it is in the United States he dislikes. That is such a useful intervention for conservatives, really throughout the rest of the century. Like communism is whatever in domestic politics you don't like, and that gets of course, fused with the national security state during the Cold War. And it's one of the reasons why, this sort of conservative fusionism begins to unravel in the 1990s, and you see the splits between the paleocons and the neocons, and obviously Pat Buchanan's famous culture war speech saying that,
Mhm.
the war against communism abroad is over. We need to now focus on the threat of communism at home, or through feminism and whatnot. So I think that's what they're trying to do. I don't know if it's going to work.
Woke. I was
I
gonna say
talked with
wokeness is a much paler, if you will, stand-in for communism. I mean, like there were things you could point to with communism to frame it as this fear-inducing threat. Wokeness feels like more of an agitation or a grievance or something like.
Absolutely, yeah. But I mean, to be fair, that's how they substantively felt about communism. A lot of these guys back, I mean, when the John Birch Society is talking about the threat of communism in 1962, yes, there is an actual substantive understanding among some of them of international politics. But for like the average John Birch Society, like chapter leader in Southern California or in New England or in the South or something, communism is not, the threat of the Algerian Revolution. I mean, that's something that they're consuming a lot. They're reading a lot about it in Birch literature, and there's this film strips that they used to produce that they would screen at their meetings. But for them, communism is like the librarian in Nashua, New Hampshire, that is like that is carrying books written by Michael Harrington, or is like not actively censoring,
Cool.
civil rights literature. So I mean, like, the thing is that I mean, I think a lot about there was this. I was just rereading this book the other day. It's a great book by Joe Franczak. Franczak. He's a friend of mine. I should know how to pronounce his last name, but he's
I
very
know that I
interesting.
know of him, but I don't know how to say his name either.
I know. Well, Joe wrote this really great book 2 years ago called Everything is Possible, which is a history of essentially the history of the creation of anti-fascism as a global political force in the 1930s. And he quotes in the book, and I've actually been through his papers in Minnesota, Eric Sevareid, who was, of course, the big sort of CBS establishment journalist. He was like he was number two after Cronkite in the public consciousness of CBS's news guys in the 60s and 70s. Severide got his start in prominence as one of Murrow's guys in London during the Blitz. But before that, he was a cub reporter for, I think it was the Minneapolis Star. It was one of the Minneapolis newspapers covering the Teamster strike in Minneapolis in 1934. And he writes in his memoirs, which are published after the war, that, the first time he encountered fascism, was not in Europe, was not when he was sent to, I think it was first Italy or maybe it was Berlin. I forget where he went first, but it was actually in the streets of Minneapolis when the cops and sort of paramilitary force called the Citizens Alliance attacked a bunch of strikers during a big strike in 34, beat the crap out of a bunch of them, shot a bunch of them in the back, killed two people. And he writes, this is when I knew what fascism was. And so I think that for a lot of people, I mean, we were talking before we started about sort of our pathways of radicalization. I think for a lot of people, and this is actually something I want to pick up on, talking about Andor a little bit later on, but the sort of key moment is not encountering communism by encountering it in the reading about the war in Vietnam, or reading about the Soviet threat, or reading about the need to intervene in Zimbabwe or something, or Rhodesia. It's who are the people in my town who I think are agitators, who I don't like, who I want to see go away, I want to see punished in some way. Those are the communists. And then you sort of build around that. That's sort of my sense of how a lot of this works. People form their politics in part from what they're seeing, in their day-to-day lives, and then sort of understanding how that fits within the broader world. It's a very roundabout way of saying this, but so I do think then that like the woke stuff, like they see wokeism, right? And then they see it as part of this sort of broader constellation of things globally that they're against. I mean, and there's an international dimension to this too. I mean, you go to France the past 5 years, and they're always complaining about the wokeism as a sort of American import. So it is diffuse. It's not the same as communism as a coherent ideology that's something of its own but it's not nothing either. And so I think that's but now with the tariffs in particular, I think we're seeing kind of the emerging cracks in this coalition. I was always skeptical of this idea that after Trump gets into office, then all of these different fissures in the conservative coalition would begin to emerge, and things would start to split apart. I was skeptical of that because I thought, well, no, they're going to get in, and enough of them are going to get what they want, and more importantly, see the people they want to see get punished. That's going to keep it all together, at least for a while. But I think now we're getting to the point where there are real winners and losers in the coalition. Like, if prices skyrocket, that will affect enough of the tech guys and their bottom lines to, potentially see things start to split.
Yeah, the way I had parsed out the MAGA coalition from even before he took office the second time was effectively like ethno-nationalists and oligarchs. And I still think
Yep.
there's like a value to that bifurcation, but the oligarch side of that is super not monolithic, which is what you're gesturing at. And like I had written a piece not long ago for Labor Notes that was like trying to argue that the section of capital that most is like in bed with Trump does not require a healthy economy. And like, because it's all speculation, it's all VC money and AI tulip craze shit. And so like those guys, a recession would be a disciplining function on labor. It would be a good thing. And they, as long as the stock market doesn't tank, then they're good, and they've got crypto to fall back on if nothing else, which now the taxpayer will underwrite if it goes belly up. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, thanks for reminding me that I was meeting with a student today, and we were talking about I forget what it even was now. It was something about how, I remember what it was. It was that RFK is now no longer is rescinded federal funding for Narcan distribution. I'm like, fuck. I mean, like, I didn't even know that. Like, that's fucking horrible. That's an absolute fucking catastrophe. But I wasn't even following that story. So Jesus fucking Christ.
No, it's a new list of horrors like every day. And then I'm always reminded of like somebody said, I can't remember if this is attributed to somebody famous, but it's like fascism is colonialism being done to white people. And like
that's more or less what Amos Cesar said. He said it was fascism is the techniques of imperialism brought back to the metropole. But yeah, that's basically it.
Man.
And I think, I mean, I don't want to go into the fascism debate. I put that in the rearview mirror. But like, I think that's a reasonable interpretation and understanding of what's going on right now.
Oh yeah, I mean, just like as we're recording this, I guess this will come out in a week or two. But like as we're recording this, the new executive order is about like no knock raids and shit. I mean, like
police order,
literally Gestapo. Like it's you couldn't. I don't know. This whole like, as long as there's other people who get disappeared, I'm good. Like that thing I can't fucking handle. The idea that like we're not living in some version of end times is I can't roll with.
Yeah. No, there's more to be said about this, but I'll say this, that I don't think that I've seen people this afraid in sort of the activist circles that I sort of run with ever. Like much more so than during the first administration. And I think a lot of it is, they just arrested a fucking judge for basically giving ICE the wrong directions, right? Like if they can do that to a judge, they can do that to fucking anybody.
That's the idea. Yeah, and like this is pre anything catastrophic happening. This isn't quote unquote good times. You know what I mean? Like there's no like there hasn't been any like leftist assassination attempts of anybody. There's not there's nothing happening in the streets that's violent. It's
but I think that the thing. So I mean, it's funny. I was talking with a liberal friend of mine the other day, and they were saying to me, and I, to be fair, I think it was a fairly credible case at first glance. They were saying to me, well, this. Things are bad. Obviously, they're getting worse, but civil society seems to be mobilizing against Trump. It's kind of the similar arguments to this piece by Zach Beauchamp that I was reading in Vox the other day about how, they're trying to do the same techniques as the Orban regime in Hungary, but because this is America, it's less effective because of civil society, blah, 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 blah. And I mean, I think there's something to that, but I also firmly believe that and I don't think this is even deliberate on their part, but that a lot of this stuff can be explained by the libidinal desire to reenact 2020, but this time to just fucking kill people like en masse. Like, because this is why the Cotton op-ed and one became such a big deal that it ended up getting Michael Bennett fired. But two, why so many conservatives were like, well, what's wrong with this? It's because, what they wanted was the violent suppression of what was at the time a left-wing protest movement that actually appeared to be capable of contesting the authority of the state, at least at the local level. And they wanted violence, and they got some violence. They got a lot of it. But they didn't get mass shootings. They didn't get Tiananmen. And I think that's what they wanted. And I read a lot of this stuff as like, well, they're setting themselves up so that if and when things get that bad again, then they can do that. And they again, they don't want to do it because they're trying to consolidate power or anything. This is just ultimately they're sort of enacting their violent fantasies. And, and again, I think we can see a lot of resonance with this last bit of Andor, the first season here with the Empire.
Yeah. God, there's so much more to talk about with this. I need to get you on my other show where we can just do that. For Andor.
Yeah. So let's go to something like light, like pop culture, Star Wars,
about revolution.
Space wizards and their like